Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Heat Soaked. I'm KT. That's Chris right there.
What's up, guys?
Um, and yeah, we're heat soaked. And before we get into it, we actually got this made
Yeah,
today.
yeah, we got some stickers.
Yeah,
We're starting out. We're
we're
getting big.
we're on our way.
We're rolling, man. Oh man.
So
That's
before we
it.
get into it, what's up with you, Chris?
Oh
You been
man,
good?
nothing crazy, man. It's cold as hell out here, man.
I hear
It's
you.
one of the colder scenes. What is it? It was 20 something, under 20 something degrees last night for the first time in Florida in a while.
That's
So it's
rare.
yeah, very rare. So usually getting down here, getting into the 30s is rare. So getting colder down here, man, is definitely loving. I'm sure the cars are loving it. All that dense air getting
Yeah.
into those areas. So
So no heat
uh,
soaked.
yeah, man, no heat soak at the moment, but I'm sure it's gonna come back. Growing up in Miami, we sure have the heat, and those guys down there, the coldest they got was like 50, 60. So 40s maybe at the end of the day. But that's it, man. How you been?
Good. Making progress on this guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what's
I got the fuel system in a while ago, working
gotcha,
on getting the rear subframe back in, put
gotcha,
together my differential, so I replaced some axle seals. I resealed it up, like after cracking it open, just checking in, making sure I didn't have any like broken teeth or anything within my
gotcha.
differential. So that thing's sealed back up. I was just gonna paint it a little bit, assemble it back on to my subframe. I got some poly bushings,
Nice,
um,
nice.
and then subframe's gonna go back in the car soon.
Gotcha,
So
man. If you
making
guys want to
progress.
see that subframe reinstall, you want to see what the underneath of this bad boy looks like. It is like a wet dream for any car mechanic going down there. So hit that comment button, guys. Hit that subscribe. We'll go ahead and see if we can get that added on. But man, what are we talking about today? Let's talk about it. It's one of those
Yeah.
crazy things, man. So I grew up a little bit around the world, man, but it's one of those things where I mainly grew up in Miami. Miami was called home. The bright lights, the crazy music, the trumpets going crazy. You wake up, you go to a cafe, and you have a coffee in the morning with
Mhm.
a pastelito. You hang out, all the families all around. You hang out with your cousins, man. But let's talk about the cars.
Yeah.
Man, Miami was a crazy scene. It was one of those things where all of the old school guys back in the 90s, the kids of the 70s and 80s, they all had the muscle. Old school muscle still a big deal down in Miami. If you have the classics, all the open shirts, the little chest hair
Yeah.
everywhere, the gold chains, man. That's the style down there, man. But having one of those and knowing a guy with a nice old school muscle car, man. It's one of those things. Even for example, my family had a 67 Mustang Fastback in green. It
Nice.
was beautiful, and my I had to get rid of it at one point. So
Mm.
it's definitely a miss. But on the other side of that scene, I didn't grow up anywhere there was snow.
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So,
let's talk about where you're at, man.
yeah, I was born and raised up north,
Uh-huh,
so Philadelphia,
uh-huh.
Pennsylvania, if you guys don't know, but, 1,000 miles away from
How many
Orlando.
Philadelphias are there? Let's talk about that. Let's pause for a minute and really have a discussion. Sorry, you told me that earlier. I had to say something.
But, there were some similarities, but honestly, being over 1,000 miles away, even
Hmm.
though Philly, Miami, both East Coast cities,
Yeah, most East
but
Coast.
regionally, we're different.
Oh, 100%.
Um,
Absolutely. We had beachside meets and neon civics early
yeah,
on. We had year-round cruising. I'm sure you guys had
to
lots
deal
of
with all the weather elements, we had snow. We also had really hot, humid days, just like here in Florida.
yeah,
But yeah, the culture there was kind of different.
yeah,
So being in a big city and being in that densely populated geographical area up there, you
yeah.
have Philly, New York, Baltimore, DC.
Hmm.
It's a lot of big cities up there. Car culture is really big up there.
Yeah,
For me, what I noticed most was the tuning car culture, and that's
gotcha.
why I am in this particular era of cars, the
Yeah,
tuning cars. So Evos are really big up there when I was growing up, probably in the late 2000s,
yeah,
when
yeah.
I really had the ability to take notice and afford cars and like look at them
Yeah,
rather than being like a
it's when
child.
we started
Yeah.
interacting more than usual.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
Um, Evo 8s, Evo 9s, all-wheel drive power up there. So you had a ton of STIs,
Yeah.
WRXs floating around up
Yep,
there.
yep,
It's a
all
lot different compared to what you're saying with all your muscle cars and your neon light Civics down here. Now,
mhm.
granted, we still had Civics, we had muscle cars up there, but I think the climate dictated a lot of the culture up there as well.
Oh, for
So a
sure.
lot of all-wheel drive vehicles up there. You had a lot of Audis, S4s, A4s,
Mhm.
like I mentioned, the WRXs,
Yeah,
STIs, the Evos. But there was still that unique culture up there, and people still were gravitating to just cars in general.
yeah.
Now, that was also like 20 years ago, so I know our car culture has evolved since then.
Absolutely.
But let's get into it specifically. Let's talk about today. Let's talk about tuner car culture, and
Mhm.
let's also talk about what you had mentioned, the muscle car
Well,
culture.
yeah, I think there's something I always wanna ask people is like, "Hey, guys, what was your first car obsession? Was it muscle? Was it import? Was it European?" But, there's all these styles and all these, types. I grew up a around muscle, KT grew up around imports and watching each other, and, of course, I mean, I gotta joke with you, man, Philly winters must have really sucked for cruising around. 'Cause there's really nothing you can do when it gets that cold out there, you know?
I mean, once the snow hit the ground, you if you had an all-wheel drive car, you could have some good fun, and even with a rear-wheel drive, a snowy parking lot.
Oh, yeah, you had that fun, man. Well, I mean, good I guess we had the rain on one hand, and we didn't need neon lights to find our cars at night because everyone decided that bright orange was the best color.
Mhm.
Like, so
Well, we had to deal with rust buckets.
I mean,
What
yeah, that's true. That's true. You guys had the snow, the salt that
Yep,
gets
the
into
salt
them.
that they put down on the
Yeah,
road, and
yeah.
yeah,
Well, if you lived in Miami, man, you had the sea spray.
yeah,
Anytime you live
that's
near the
true.
water, that's the same kind of thing. It's just a different kind. It usually gets on paint, but you'll see
Mhm.
it underneath if you drive near like the beaches, stuff like that. But what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about muscle cars and inboard cars? For me, muscle cars, it's raw V8 power. It's that American heritage, good old US of A.
Yeah.
It's drag racing. It's
Straight
big.
line
Yeah,
speed,
exactly. Big motors,
loud
big body,
noises.
steel.
Yeah.
They're burning tire at every light. Not independent axles. You're looking at one solid axle on these
Yeah.
boys. Drum brakes, carburetors, all the fun stuff, man. That's what I think of when I think of muscle car.
Yeah, that's the stereotype. And
Mhm.
then on the flip side, import cars, specifically like JDM
Yeah,
import cars.
absolutely.
So we're talking about typically smaller, compact vehicles.
Yeah,
There was a time where front wheel drive was a big thing,
it was
and
the biggest.
yeah,
Yeah,
front wheel
absolutely.
drive, but all the drivetrains, but they're typically smaller engines too.
Mhm.
But turbos slapped onto them, or just high revving
Yeah.
four-cylinder engines like your Civics and S2000s, VTEC,
Yeah,
that
VTEC.
typically people associate those import cars with precision driving.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about like track driving, even drifting,
Mhm.
in comparison to your muscle cars that are like straight line, drag strip type cars.
Exactly,
So the
exactly.
contrast it's almost like a night and day contrast, but
It is,
once
yeah.
we kinda, like, dive into it, you realize it's really not that different,
Yeah,
honestly.
I mean, you're right. It's really not like is it weird growing up in a car scene where I've seen like a 69 Camaro right across the street from a Civic with green lighting underneath because they watched Fast and the Furious once and they were
Yeah.
like, this is it. This is my moment to shine. Yes, is it weird? Yes, absolutely. But it's one of those things where, I think about all the things that muscle taught me. First thing you think of muscle is superchargers, right? Stripes, headers. You think about all of the you don't think about all the induction types, or you don't think about coilovers or neon light. All that stuff was for those kids in those
Yeah.
Civics, and like then that was me. That was my style. So having family that loved those muscle cars and growing up looking at 67 GTOs and 65 Mustangs, and looking at just beautiful beautiful cars. We're talking about the old steel body
Mhm.
cars with just big old motors, man. It was just what it was. The Impalas, the everything. I can just
Yeah.
think of a million cars I could name
And I
that could
I
be
think
part of
you're
that list.
hinting at it, but it's kinda generational.
It is.
So
It
you're
is.
talking about 60s, 70s
Yeah,
muscle cars,
absolutely.
and
Right.
and we were talking earlier, and the focus of our podcast is like 90s and
Mhm.
2000s.
Mhm.
But explain to me. So obviously, a 60s, 70s muscle car
Yeah.
on paper is different than a 90s, 2000s like tuner car.
Oh,
But
dude.
in reality, like what is so different about them?
Oh, dude, you're talking about like man. All right. So I guess back in the day, right, when our parents were growing up or when they were getting their first jobs and finishing high school, 60s and 70s were going around. So like they were building these cars, these giant steel, you know, machines that are running around. V8s were the rave. You know, if you didn't have a V8, you just didn't have enough power. And
Yeah.
you talk about luxury. You talk about when you these are times when all the windows were, you know, they had to roll them down by
Hmm.
manually. You know, you had to, you know, sometimes your tack gauge was on it, for example, on a GTO outside on your hood. You know,
Okay.
you're talking about the culture of just the boomers. You know, this is a culture of hard work, hard earned, back when houses were 90,000, $80,000 and a car was maybe 3 or 4 grand,
Yeah.
and you could buy a brand new one off the lot for that, and it's just the craziest thing you've ever thinking of. But when I think about muscle, right, I think about that old Miami feel, old Miami style of like you know, lots of, so my family is, you know, Cuban, so it's like it's different, but growing up in that style, you have, you know, everybody growing up pulling into a yard. Some of the clunkers are still running, but all the uncles underneath the car or underneath the hood
Hmm.
trying to work on it, trying to tune that carburetor, trying to make sure that, of course, us watching and being like, oh, what's that, you know, let's turn, you know, and starting to learn what a wrench is, you
Yeah.
know, growing up in shops. Things like that are what muscle remind me of. Raw, loud V8 power and just steel bodies. Dude, you could take out a building with your car and your
Yeah.
car might have a broken bumper. Like
But the common element between them and the time period that we're talking about is still the fact that people are wrenching on these cars,
Mhm,
whether they're wrenching on a
mhm,
50-year-old car or a
absolutely.
30-year-old car. It's
Absolutely.
still a physical engine.
Yep.
It may have 4 less cylinders in it, but
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
you're still they're still turning a wrench, they're still crawling under this, changing fluids, and I think that's what's kinda cool about the car culture in general,
Absolutely.
right? As the car culture evolves from muscle era
Yeah.
to tuner era to eventually, like, EV hybrid era, there's still this group of people that have this one thing in common, which is fixing something, messing around with something, making something look cool,
Making the
personalizing
adjustments.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Personally, for me, the muscle era was just something that I've never gotten into,
Okay.
and you know it by now, but I'm kinda, like, into aesthetics a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah,
and
you're
it was just the aesthetic of that era wasn't really for me. You
Mhm.
know, I can appreciate the design language back then,
Yeah,
but not for me, right? I think overall, like, when we talk about that era, there are certain things that remind us of what that is. So you had mentioned,
yeah.
V8 engines, loud noises, but let's get into, like, the 90s and 2000s era
Yeah.
cars. So what about those cars in particular that kinda, like, set off that era, and how does it contrast?
Man, okay, so I think I wanna make this similarity, right? Like, when we talk about motors nowadays, like, we're getting back into the era now where more is not better, right? We're looking at hybrids, we're looking at electric cars. So our generation now is going through something a little different or something a little
Yeah, we're
similar
all
in
about efficiency
efficiencies
and,
and stuff. Back
yeah,
then, more was just better. Like you had a 6.6 liter V8 with a, you know, replacing 389s. They only had 335 horsepower, maybe a 4 barrel carburetor on it. If you want a high output, and these things had like 3 speed hydromatic automatic transmissions. So like literally, it's a 3 speed.
they're
Like it's
drinking fuel.
yeah, it was all about the beauty about of how beautiful you can turn steel around and how you can make it bubble and things like
I
that.
think there's a lot of simplicity involved in it, but
There was.
not in a basic dumb way. It's just
Mm,
simple in that it was easy to produce. easy to work
It
on.
was. There was parts aplenty. You could
Mhm.
stop by anywhere and probably get a part, to be honest, and somebody could sneeze and a part would appear. Like,
Yeah.
there's just the similar parts were everywhere, so it's, like, very interesting when you see it, but growing up and seeing that similarity that you're pointing out, and then seeing, like, one of these parked on the curb, in beautiful, beautiful red, for example, I say GTO a lot because it's one of the ones that are near and dear to my heart, but a '67 GTO, parked in red with a white or black top, and then you see a Civic right across the street. Back then, like, you follow what your parents kind of told you, and you had what your uncles and your
Mhm.
cousins thought was cool. And back then, I was like, man, that's awesome. But then I look over after I see Fast and Furious, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of that.
Yeah.
I can't say no. I'm not, but it's kind of cool. You see the green lights, but I think it's the first time you saw, like, for example, if you're ever on a track or ever on anything like that, and you saw like a 240 SX with engine mods beat a Camaro
Mhm.
on as you were standing on the strip getting ice cream, you're like, oh, like, there's another world to this. There's
Yeah.
more. There's what's your first time in Philly seeing an old school car like compared? Like that's it's one of those crazy moments where I'm sure you saw them around, but they were like the unicorns, and you weren't really looking. You were
Oh,
looking at
yeah.
the other side. That's kind of where for me, like, muscle versus import has a different place because I never chose a side. I appreciate them both,
Mhm.
but I first of all, it was started off muscle, man, old school muscle. When you see the Camaros, when you see the just anything with those beautiful steel bodies is gonna be something that's always in my heart. It's a style. It's a memory. It's of a different time.
Yes.
Then that's what I was introduced to, influenced by, that different time that our parents went over.
Yeah,
So
for
that's
sure.
that's what I enjoyed,
You're taking a trip down memory
yeah,
lane
yeah,
right
it
now.
is, it is, it's kinda cool, man. It's like, you hear the stories, right? So we're all developed, as kids, and we all look around at other things, but we talk about cars and bringing it back. It's all about the stories that you hear.
Mhm.
For example, like, he was very famous. It's very well known for, like, having cars still running to this day. Yeah, they have a boat battery and, one less, carburetor than needed, which is one. But they're still keeping them running. There's old school cabs. There's, Carmen Gias. There's a lot of different vehicles that a lot of people had a lot of faith in. It's what their families grew up in. So when they saw the new cars coming through and all these classics moving on, for them it was a disgust factor. They hated the import scene.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when we grow old enough, what do? Oh, I like the stuff that you hate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I landed on both sides of the tracks, man. It's a very interesting setup, but I appreciate both superchargers and turbos. I
Mm.
appreciate headers, coilovers, aero kits, and big rims. I appreciate the neon lights, but I also appreciate a classy, like, blue car with a white stripe. You know, we all had Test Drive 5. We all appreciated that. So it's interesting, seeing a body kit from a Civic dragging the asphalt, and then seeing, one of your uncles get, like, buy a car with a homemade supercharger and blew the engine. Don't know why that happened. I don't know why I remember that, but it's funny. It's
Yeah.
it's then you hear about the fails, and you hear, but it all comes back to one thing: cars as a culture and guys working on cars, like, but
Mhm.
people, excuse me, men and ladies working on cars and going from there. Back
Yeah.
then, it was just the stories that developed us, that we heard, that
Yeah.
I'm sure you heard growing up. It's just a different era.
Yeah.
It's exactly what they kind of go from. And then Fast and Furious came out, Gone in 60 Seconds came out, and we were like, this is kind of cool. I'm gonna roll into
Well,
this.
so knowing what you know now about building cars, fixing cars,
Yeah.
would you get into a project car from that muscle car era?
Oh, so yes, and I'll tell you why. Because of my love of muscle cars and even my love of imports, there's something different about driving around in a classic. If you find anything from 60s, 70s, it's just the driving around. It could be a boat for all you care.
Yeah.
and they are. Most of them
They're
are.
mostly boats, mostly rust buckets if they're
Yeah,
gonna be
absolutely. Good
restored.
luck finding anything not rusted out. That's, of course, if it's in the north, it hit snow,
Mhm.
unless it was garage kept. And if it hit snow, wasn't washed off, right? That salt got on it. What does salt do? Melts it and rust it out. So they're all rusted out buckets. But well, look what a Charger is selling for. Find me a '69 Charger body, just the base, under $30,000. Guarantee you, it's insane. You won't find it. But that was the car that Dominic Toretto was driving in the Fast and Furious, so he made it famous. So it's like, but I think about like our different areas. In like Florida, we had year-round cruising. We had beach meets. We had a really diverse culture, right? You can go eat some Italian food and then be on, in Little Havana, and you could be just kind of cruising by. You really see like a bunch of old school cabs, some 59s, some things
Mhm.
things that really would really shock you. But it was also the culture that I was in. That's just for me. That's how it was in Philly. I'm surprised you didn't have like a lot of muscle car dominance and seasonal meets, and you had urban drag culture.
We did, so in the suburbs, there's a lot of open land. It's not that different than Florida
Yeah.
on in terms of the countryside. So you go out even beyond suburban land, there's like
Yeah.
farmlands, all of that, and that's where you'll find your muscle cars, you'll
Yeah,
find
yeah,
all the lifted trucks,
yeah.
all that stuff. So, yeah, I had exposure to it, but for me, it just didn't do it.
Yeah,
But what I found to be really interesting is when we think about today, a lot of those two cultures have blended together.
yeah.
You know, the big term is like resto mod. There's
Uh-huh.
so many
Yep,
resto mods of modern,
mhm,
somewhat modern day cars.
yep,
The perfect example from a JDM standpoint is a Nissan 240Z.
yeah,
So a
yep.
70s 240Z that gets resto modded to look a little more modern, but it's still a
It's like a
70s
Camaro,
retro,
yeah,
yeah, looking
yeah,
car.
yeah.
So
Eh,
the blending of aesthetics, but also functionality. So
true.
we talked about drag racing, muscle cars, drag racing, those like go hand in hand together, right? But we are seeing nowadays anything can be built to be drag raced. You can
Yeah,
build a Japanese import car, you can
mhm,
build a European, you can build trucks to drag race,
yeah,
and then drifting.
yep,
Traditionally, we were thought, oh, drifting is sort of like this Asian thing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we had
yeah.
Japanese cars
Japanese
drifting,
only,
but
like, yeah, purists and all that,
we have
always.
Mustangs drifting nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, we have Mustangs drifting all the time now. It's actually one of the crazier, like, more competitive cars that they're using, which is crazy to me. A lot of people are using that, but that's a heritage, right? Just like, a Corolla or an 86 is a heritage. Back then, cars were made like Porsche, for example, like was used both in to make like a really fast car in Japan, but here it wasn't really used much. So it really depended on where you were and what you were interested in. But the car scene was all about what you were driving. And,
Mhm.
to be at a car meet back then, like your, uncle or your cousin bringing you to a car meet and you're just looking around and you're like, whoa, there's all these cool, crazy different cars. Then you see all the muscle car guys on the left hand side.
Yeah,
You see the import guys on the right hand side. And they're like, oh, this is crazy. We're driving, and you're like, they're all talking smack to each other and yelling at each other, and it's hilarious, like making fun of each other's cars,
it's like a
It,
standoff.
it is.
Yeah.
It was this modern day perspective that you might like. Some people enjoyed both. I did. Hybrid builds that existed, all the cool stories you heard about the car being in families for many years. Then you heard about like families working on their cars and the imports and personal stories. It's this history that we learn from. Plus, you got to remember, if you don't know much about muscle, a lot of the muscle cars developed a lot of the performance stuff that came by.
Yeah.
Even American muscle had developments in Europe and Asia that they developed things into from there, like power steering, AC,
Mhm.
all belt driven at one point. It's just we all learn so much from the past. So I think the most part for me is if you learn from the past, you honestly start, looking at what the future always holds. Like, did we ever think we were going to get to Apple CarPlay?
Yeah, and to your point, it's very much technological,
Yeah,
and when I think about muscle cars, I think Mustang is one of the first names in my head,
yeah,
and for a while, a Mustang was a solid rear axle,
uh-huh,
and up until, what, like 10 years ago or
yeah,
so,
exactly.
they went with independent rear suspension. I mean,
Yeah,
that's an evolution for that platform, but it's just keeping up with modern technology.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's a fun fact is like Florida, right down here in Florida, and growing up here, we hosted a lot of the early on U.S. drift competitions.
Yeah.
So like being around that and like, okay, yeah, I get it. Too Fast and Too Furious was all a part of. Yeah, you saw the drifting around corners. There was legit drifting going on down there, and there was a real arrest that happened because of that. Listen, I just want to ask any listeners that are listening, if you had, yeah, if you were in one of those, or you know, which car build from that era would you bring back or bring to that? But there was racing all the time. You're talking by Alligator Alley. There's a bunch of like just open road, and you had a lot of guys do that. So it's just, I think, I don't know which region, whether it be Philly or Miami, would have the coolest meets or the craziest builds, but I think we each had something unique about both of those. And it's just something about that heritage in muscle that I really appreciate. But when it comes to import, it was all about creativity. So
Hmm.
everyone kept their cars relatively the same when it came to muscle, right? Of course,
Hmm.
you had everyone had a blower at one point, you know, those are for the crazy, you know, racing guys. But you had the Florida nights and the Philly streets, the creativity with imports, the tech that we were using when VTech came out, right? And you know, everyone was like losing their minds and started using VTech controllers, and you know, it's
Yeah.
just it's the you know, really interesting, I guess, discussions and conversations that came up from all of those meets. And I think you know, you especially have some good memories from those times and watching those and everything, growing up around that side, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I know this is kind of a strange topic to talk about, but let's get into it. Like the people around those particular
Hmm.
types of cultures.
Absolutely,
So you
absolutely.
talk about the muscle car culture. Like, what do you think about? I mean, I'm gonna ruffle feathers when I think about mullets. I think about, you know,
Rednecks,
yeah,
clearly, yeah.
yeah.
Oh my god. Oh,
But
I'm excited to listen where this goes. Go ahead.
no, but I want your opinion. So in my opinion, that I mean, right or wrong, that's what I think about, right? Muscle culture, there's a particular group of people, there's a particular aesthetic
Yeah,
that's kind of like in my head related to that. Older people, usually older guys,
yeah.
either mullets or classic Corvette drivers are all like 50 plus years old guys. And
Man.
then on the flip side, when you think about tuner culture, you're like, oh, they're younger people. They're usually either broke or the all the money they have goes directly into their car.
Well, it's funny, like, when you had muscle cars, you had a lot of, like, different, you had a lot of different backgrounds come by. You could have the
Yeah,
mailman show up and he's got like a coronet, you know, like you could have some interesting people, but like what were they interested in? They were interested in restoring something that came back, the tweak of classic muscle cars. There's a lot of, like you said, resto mods, right? There's new LSs being put in these old school, you know, cars being, you know, supercharged, moving. You know, it's just about people. There was always a point. We talk about people. Muscle cars, they love showing off their cars. Yeah. Was there a drag strip? Yeah, absolutely. Did they race illegally? Absolutely. Like, were we all teenagers once? Do they not understand where our love for car culture came
yeah.
from? Our culture started back then, and there was a cars around. You know, they might not have been the fastest, but then again, they were some pretty quick ones.
The tuner car culture has a lot of similarities too,
Hmm.
and I think common elements you're talking about, like music is a common element,
Yeah.
but in one culture, it may be country music, but in another culture, it may be hip hop, you
Yeah.
know? But music still bridges that gap.
I get it. Elvis was here back then. I get I think when you hear Elvis, the first thing I don't think of is a muscle car. I agree. But at the end of the day, you know, you're right. We all had our own music. We all had our own cars. We all had our own
Their style,
styles.
yep.
Exactly. You got it exactly. And we all had our own collectors and restorers, people that want to see these, you know, cars as heritage pieces, family heirlooms. And there were a lot of tight knit communities based on that. Like, when I say like car clubs and local meets, like when you see those clubs or those places, like a lot of the same guys and uncles would meet around the same place every now and then. They, you know, have a bite to eat, a sandwich, a coffee, you know, smoke a cigar. You know, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
talk about what life was back when they were growing up. And so when you're around that and you hear these stories, it's a lot of significant things that you hear. It really humbles you because you hear stories about like from everywhere else, and it's they use their cars as a self-expression, and they had pride in building or restoring or tuning, and I think that's what I appreciate.
You can tell a lot from a person's car,
Mhm.
right? And then someone who's really into cars, they
Yeah.
have a classic car that you know that they took really good care of, like a '60s classic car.
Yeah.
You can kinda for good for better or worse, you can kinda tell, like, what this person was about. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about previously.
Yeah.
There's a lot of personality in cars, and that's why it is kind of exciting when we think about today and we think
Yeah.
about going forward into the future. You and I, we love the 90s to 2000s tuner car, but we know that we're going to be dated and there's going to be a
Oh,
new
yeah.
a new group
A new
that
s
has
yep,
a new
a
style.
new
There's
style.
there's new stereotypes that are going to be associated
Dude,
with them.
look what's happening right now, the K-truck era.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we love our speed, we love our hardcore racers and stuff, but there's a K truck era happening right now, and like some of our generation is all over that, and we gotta love it. Like there's stuff coming from Japan that wasn't allowed back then. All I'm waiting for is all the cars they said no to. I just want them to come. That's all I care about. Of course they say you're lust for anything that you can't have, right? And in car culture, the untouchables, right? All of those cars from Japan, they were like, "Oh, you can't bring over." We were like, "We will do anything to get those cars here." So we're waiting
Yeah.
on the rule. But you had the car communities, you had the cruiser guys, you had the drag strip addicts, and it's like for every, I guess, culture. And because you got to remember, at the end of the day, that muscle culture was the 60s and 70s. It was the automotive golden era, right? Those cars
Yeah.
were coming out and they were wanted for from every country. They were trying to ship them out and try and find them in Germany and Japan. You had one of those in Japan, you were the man, like but it's also about like really sharing your passion for cars, right? Is this something that we're going to do as we pass it on? Absolutely. It's why we're doing this. It's why we have these conversations because, in all honesty, when no one listening, with no one listening to us, but at the end of the day, I think we had our own patience. We had our own nostalgia. Everything that we learned about cars, either the hard way or the easy way, it's there's always a unicorn that we're gonna find in every era. And I think that's important to remember, like where cars came from. That's why
Yeah.
for me, it's
I
really
agree.
it's really interesting. It's also really interesting to see like the younger enthusiasts, the kids that are growing up now, mixing with the old school muscle or our modern mods and really blending these aesthetics into like cars. Like you said, there's newer cars that made it look older,
Oh, there's
because
EV swaps. I'm actually
yeah,
really kind of like
EV swaps. That's
interested in
another
that.
wild one. Uh,
Taking a somewhat modern car and putting an electric drivetrain in it.
yeah, and you know what's crazy is like so you like things like that like were always made by like the car culture. They were always like a club that did it, like EV swap. Probably a garage started it. Garage started a club and they started going crazy. There's EV tuning now. Like
Yeah.
you can tune your EVs. Like this is a whole new thing we're talking about. Like along with K trucks and everything like that. It's pride in a craft, right? It's people developing new skills
Yeah.
for performance
Exactly.
modifications.
Mhm.
It's and we find them sacred, right? We love our turbos. We love our RVs. We love our, our you don't touch what's right. And that's it. I think that's cars are meant to look good. They're meant to sound good, and especially in sunny Florida, man, the streets are the stage. Like everyone tries to drive around with something nice. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what it is to be a car culture right
Yeah,
here.
I can totally see you rolling around in
Oh,
a
absolutely.
classic, like, 70s or
Oh
60s
man, listen,
car.
dream car ever. If anyone has one for sale for under $500, I'm just kidding. It's a 1967 Pontiac GTO, man. There's
Yeah.
no other car. I just want a 6.6 liter V8 in it. Just want a 400 cubic inch.
What color?
Red. All day long. Red. There, that car in red. I forgot. It's not Renaissance red, but it's another one. But it's just, dude, the thing had it was such a beautiful car, so sought after. And remember, the fastest car back then, 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds to 8.1 seconds. You're doing it's insane, but like it had a padded dash. There was a dual circuit master cylinder. It was like one of the high end cars back then. If
Yeah,
you had a GTO, you were the man.
and when we think about it today, 6 point something seconds is not fast at
For
all.
a 6.6 liter motor, if that was made today, that thing would be doing like mid threes, like fours max. Like you're seeing a monster come out of.
But it's the evolution of
Yeah.
cars, and we have to remember it's about the experience.
Well, back then it was about the displacement.
Well, that was part
That
of the
was absolutely
experience.
it, like, but no, it's funny because like the nostalgia that we're talking about, it meets the modern times. It's the respect that we have for these classic cars. For me, right, is the something that I learned, but I had to be willing to embrace the new tech, the mods,
Yeah.
anything. The dude. When I saw my four cylinder and I started recognizing like motors and things like that, I was like, what? Like there's a four cylinder there? Like
Mhm.
little things like that, and then of course as adults we have to learn passion over practicality.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, a lot of that paved the way for a ton of future enthusiasts,
yeah.
but have you ever wondered what it was like being an enthusiast back then?
Oh yeah.
Were their parents like lusting after 30s and 40s cars and Model Ts?
Dude, my old man drove a Studebaker. All right. Listen, when I say that, I feel like I date myself, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's a piece of crap car back then, but some people keep them in collections and sell them for millions. And like you talk about the 1967, 65 Ford Mustang Fastback that
Mhm.
my grandmother had. Holy crap, dude, if I had that car this day, you think I'd hang on to it? Yeah, like, I can't even, like, say that enough. Abso-freaking-lutely, I'd have that and, dude, I'd be polishing it every day. I would look like Bo Duke with his car, like, on the General Lee, like, it's crazy how, it's a passion, like, he had an old school, Charger, and, like, that car made it, and it's just one of those things where, like, once again, we talk about cars in movies, talking about cars in movies,
Mhm.
you had the Dukes of Hazzard that had the Charger. That was a long, long time running. You had Fast and Furious for us.
Yeah.
So it's just, we all had our portrait and our image that we think of cars. So when you think of car culture back then, oh, dude, it's just guys working on a V8, doing carburetor work, maybe pulling ahead because back then it was a little easier, less electronics.
Mhm.
Like cold starting a V8, like just had to turn the key a little bit more than usual. Sometimes when it didn't work, you kind of stomped on the gas. Sometimes you had the ability to get it running after just pushing a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the fun part, man.
Do you think they ever knew what was coming in the sense that, hey, we're living in this current time
Yeah.
and I have this GTO and I can't see 40 years into the future, but
Yeah.
a GTO now is just a GTO. I mean, there's a ton of them around. I'm just driving around just like a normal guy with everybody else's car until we fast forward into today's age and you see a GTO,
Yeah.
like that is a special car.
Oh,
But back then
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
like, well, this is just my car.
I think, like, a lot of cars now have a lot of modern upgrades. Like, I think fuel injection has replaced the carburetors for a lot of them. I think modern suspension has made it smoother rides, aftermarket wheels, LEDs, stuff like that, and maybe some exhaust tuning.
Yeah.
But I think, like, dude, if you see a classic Camaro, Challenger, older Chevy, like, on Miami, Tampa, Orlando, it's gonna dominate the road. People are gonna stop and be like, even old trucks, man, old Ford F-100s, old truck. People are gonna bring their, restore their modified classics to the weekend meetups, and they're gonna play some music out of them, some food, photo ops. People are gonna still love those classics because that's where our history in cars
Mhm.
came from. And of course, social media is around. It plays a huge
Yeah.
role. People take photos and detail them. But dude, it's hard finding a nice classic these days. And if you still find it, you're on one of the lucky sides.
And that's kinda what some people do nowadays too,
Mhm.
buy modern cars
Yep.
in anticipation of them becoming future classics.
Oh, yeah, dude, the collector and the restoration scene is insane. There's shops just dedicated to restoring old and, like, resto modding, like you said,
Yeah.
older vehicles. Like, there's a shop in, Pensacola or, Fort Walton, I think no, it's Pensacola, Florida. They just do Broncos. They resto mod Broncos, man. And, yeah, are they asking a bunch for it? Yeah, but it's resto modded. You have a nice motor now, it's reliable. I can't be one to judge. I haven't bought one from them, but I would love to, talk to them and be like, hey, what started this? What? And
Mhm.
it's probably a guy had a bunch of Broncos, missed them, did it himself, and was like, hey, this wasn't as bad as I thought. And went from there, and a lot of enthusiasts buy older cars. They like blending those old school aesthetics into the modern, setups. They like, dude, classic cars still are still all over the place.
Yeah.
Younger crowds love them. You gotta learn from the old gearheads, They did it without all the stuff we have, the easy turnarounds. But once again, they also did it without technology. So if you want a car to run, if an EMP, when electromagnetic pulse went out at any point in time, every car we have nowadays is fried because it's got a computer.
Yeah.
You wanna jump in an old school car, hey man, that thing will start right up.
Yeah.
You're no problem.
Not
But
many of them left, but
not many of
yeah.
them left, man. That's how it goes. It's a very interesting setup that we have,
And that's where it's interesting nowadays too, because with our global transition to hybrids and EVs,
Mm,
we're slowly gonna phase out gas cars. We don't know how long it'll take for it to be phased out,
mhm,
but the cars that we take for granted today that we just see everywhere, and we know that they're fun cars like a FRS or BRZ or a
mhm,
Miata or a 350Z, we
yeah.
see them all the time and they're like, yeah, that's cool, but that's nothing special, right? But in 30 years, in 40 years,
Yeah.
that might be something special, just like how 50 years ago, your GTO is something special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 50,
Oh, that's
60,
even yeah,
yeah,
60 what?
50, yeah.
26 plus 50, so,
Are you
yeah,
doing the
like
math right now?
60
I
years
just wanna
ago,
see
yeah,
this. I'll sit back and I'll
70
watch.
years ago.
70 something years ago, man. Like so the older generation, our parents are getting up there, man, but they still remember it. It's interesting to talk about and sharing stories of their cars and listen to what your old man's first car was.
And then when we become, 80-year-old
Yeah,
dudes
and we're driving
and
around
our
these
kids are
things.
driving around like
Oh,
EVs,
they're floating. No, by
and
the
we're,
time
like, drooling
oh,
over
dog.
a BRZ
Yeah,
because
it's
that
gonna
was
it's gonna be the Jetsons. It's gonna
yeah,
be driving flying cars by then because the Elon's gonna make every car have a rocket ship on it. It's gonna float and drive around. It's just craziness, man. No, it's we're gonna see the fusion of the old and the new, and we're gonna see like everything just adapt. I think it's gonna be fun to see the future. But I don't think I'm ever gonna get away from my love for our JDM culture. It's just what our culture was. I have mad respect and love for the muscle culture, and I'm always looking for one, in my
yep,
range. But even my brother, for example, he's got a muscle car, and I have one of my best friends on the East Coast has another muscle car, so you see them around, they're still there, and hopefully our generation's holding on to them and taking care of them and doing what's right by those cars and not, it's a because there is a restorative property to 'em. Some people just fix them, keep them, and then wait for the sale, but they never get to experience the
yeah.
drive.
There's
And
a
that's
lot
a
of
sad
nostalgia to it
fact,
at the end of the day, to
Yeah,
your point. It
absolutely.
reminds you of your grandparents, your
Oh,
parents, and
absolutely.
eventually when you become a parent, you
Mhm.
become a grandparent, your kids are gonna feel the same exact
Oh,
way.
man, could you imagine the feeling of bringing your kids in one of those cars and driving around? Like, that's something crazy like that. It's a bunch of fun. So it's the same thing with your ride,
Yeah, if they're
Like,
still around in,
yeah,
like, 100 years and
exactly.
they haven't rusted out,
It's
but
it's interesting, man. It's a definite mix, and we're always gonna see the collectors, and I have love for both scenes, man. It is what it is. I enjoy it. All I want is a garage to keep it all. My list would be cars, a larger garage, and more cars. Like so. That's usually how it goes, brother.
yeah, for sure. I like it.
Of course, man. Of course. But yeah, hey, all respect to the muscle. You gotta respect the muscle. It brought us back. It's the reason why V8s are still a thing.
Yeah. Well, you guys let us know what your thoughts and opinions are on
Yeah.
muscle cars and just car culture and whatever era car that you guys really like.
Yeah. Tell us about your stories, man. We really want to hear it. Please leave a comment. Click that subscribe button for Heat Soaked FL, man. I want to hear your stories. What kind of car culture did you grow up in? Was it the muscle culture? Was it the import culture? If anyone
Yeah.
talks about anything, we would definitely want to hear from you guys. So
Regional too,
look,
right? Like
yeah,
me and you,
yeah. Where are you guys
we're
from? We're
over a
from different
thousand
places.
miles away,
Exactly.
and yeah, different experiences,
Yeah,
different
I wanna
places.
hear what it was like in Arizona and California, I wanna hear what it was like in, Canada even. I don't even know, down in Mexico, the stories. I'd love to hear from all over the world exactly what car culture was like, or if what's still alive around you and why you like what you like. You know?
Yeah,
Appreciate it,
for
guys.
sure.
Well, thanks for listening to our BS chat. Let's have some fun. Heat
Peace
Soaked
out,
Info. See you
guys.
guys.